Good morning. I would like to introduce you to a new personal online reading tool called Readmax. The underlying technology in Readmax is called Visual Syntactic Text Formatting. I would like to introduce you to the underlying sciences that were used to develop the tool and the validation studies that we've done for it. This project has been going on for a number of years, and we are grateful to our collaborators. The University of Minnesota and the University of Denver were involved early on in our iterative testing and validation work. Later, the University of California, Irvine conducted additional validation studies. We've received several awards from the U.S. Department of Education, who in turn gave us the special recognition of being considered a scientifically proven literacy invention in the WhatWorks Clearinghouse. The Mayo Clinic also gave us an Innovation Research Award to evaluate the technology in medical reading. We are grateful to our early publishers who adopted the technology and incorporated it in their online textbooks. These included Harcourt, who produced multiple editions across multiple subject areas and grades, and received an award from the Association of Educational Publishers for a distinguished achievement. McGraw-Hill developed college-level textbooks for us, particularly in the developmental reading category, as well as other entry-level social sciences textbooks. And Oxford University Press developed higher-level college textbooks for us in both the social sciences and the natural sciences. I'm grateful to our early and original research and development team. This started in 1998 with the goal of integrating vision and syntax to improve human reading. My name is Randall Walker, and I am a physician with a background in linguistics. My brother Stan Walker has been an ophthalmologist, and his background includes basic science in vision and eye diseases. Early on, we brought on board Phil Schloss, a senior level software architect at IBM, who had expertise in natural language processing. At the University of Minnesota Center for Cognitive Sciences, we enlisted Dr. Charles Fletcher, who had expertise in the cognitive science of reading. And we are especially grateful to the pioneering work of the late Charles Vogel. Dr. Vogel was a master teacher and got his PhD in educational technology. My brother Stan was working with a family that was dealing with a genetic retinal disease that affected about half the members of the family. In this particular disease, it is the small area in the center of the fovea that is most affected. And the frustrating thing about this is that when one is trying to read, it is the very center of the visual field where the word that you're trying to examine is located that has the most deterioration. Ironically, the words above and below the center word can sometimes be relatively clear. It's person with this condition reads the text across successive rows, they need to look carefully with microsaccades back and forth to capture the characters coming and going in their peripheral vision. However, when we considered the conventions of text formatting that have been used over the centuries, we appreciated the fact that our conventions for text formatting are not necessarily conducive to efficient reading. As the eyes move across the page, there's only a small circle of data that comes into the fovea at a high resolution, high enough to differentiate the shapes of letters. Once you get outside of this circle, the resolution drops down and the letters look relatively fuzzy. Of course, we don't experience this dynamically because each fixation really only lasts on average about 250 milliseconds. Nonetheless, what is happening as the eyes move across the page is that it is really only this middle oval inside the circle that contains the words that are of interest in interpreting the linguistic content of a sentence. One of the frustrating things for the low vision reader, but also for some dyslexics, is that the characters above and below that center row have to be actively ignored because they are competing for attention. And so this actually affects how long and in what way the reader stores any visual data as the reader moves from one fixation to the next. The natural world, not text, the eyes are actually free to move in any direction they want. And by doing that, they not only capture micro saccadic data across multiple locations, but they can remember that visual data in their mind's eye, the so-called visual memory. By moving around in any direction they want and being able to capture the visual data and glue it together, the mind's eye can actually process a much larger circle of visual data compared to that small circle of data at a fixation in text. This is actually why when anyone reads, they have to occasionally regress and go and look back at a word they had just looked at a quarter of a second ago. And that's because when reading text, the mind is not trying to remember the visual image of the text data that it had just looked at. This is because those attentional resources were strained by the surrounding characters that had no linguistic relationship to the fixated word. Regressions are actually more common, as one might expect, in low vision readers, also when the text is more challenging or complex. But an analysis of where exactly regressions are most triggered shows that they tend to be at areas in the text where the syntactic category is ambiguous or where the phrasing structure changes from one level to another. In other words, regressions reflect the work of parsing the text. Now, we are all familiar with the need to understand English grammar. Those of us who attended grammar school in the 1960s remember the practice of going up to the chalkboard and diagramming sentences. This is the first sentence of the Gettysburg Address. It looks like an erector set, and you'll notice that there's actually another smaller sentence attached to the main sentence. It is also easily appreciated that the more complex a sentence's syntactic structure is, the harder the brain has to work at solving the puzzle. Even when the investigators controlled for the number of words, the length of the words, and the difficulty of the words, by arranging the words in grammatically correct but more complex patterns, they were able to show on MRI scans that the brain needed to recruit additional resources in the right side of the brain where pattern recognition takes place. This is a fancy psychedelic diagram of how the brain parses text. It actually does not use those lines in diagramming sentences that our teacher would have us do. Noam Chomsky, the father of cognitive science and a pioneer in linguistics, found that recursion is what distinguishes human language from animal language. And his colleague Steven Pinker also wrote about this. When we create an understanding from a series of words, it's not just what the words themselves mean, but also the rules that determine how words are combined to create phrases, and how phrases can combine to make clauses, and even how clauses can be embedded within larger phrases. And so this diagram shows these recursive relationships, these hierarchical relationships. The main verb of this Gettysburg Address sentence is brought. The main subject is fathers, and the main object is nation. But these other words have their own attributes that combine and affect the reader's interpretation of each word in their respective contexts. Notice that this other little sentence, all men are created equal, is embedded within the noun phrase, the proposition. So this phrase actually modifies the proposition. You'll notice that the green color denotes the modifying properties of each of these phrases. So the fathers brought forth a nation. What kind of a nation? It was a new nation. It was a nation that was conceived. And how was it conceived? It was conceived in liberty. And it was a nation that was dedicated. And what was it dedicated to? It was dedicated to a proposition. Well, what kind of a proposition? It was a proposition that all men are created equal. Now, brain research is also showing that the kind of relationships between segments of text is not simply a matter of association. The brain actually uses categorical relations when trying to build up a sentence and build up meaning with language. It doesn't simply use chunks and statistically identified word groups. And so this categorical processing is a more natural way for building up meaning. It should also be noted that the large language models used in artificial intelligence are primarily built not with categorical relations, but simply associating word groups based on the statistical frequency that those word groups are found in the large databases of all the sentences that have ever been put on the internet. So we applied various principles from experts and combined them to develop visual syntactic text formatting. We had guidance from Dr. Gordon Legge, who is a colleague of Dr. Fletcher's at the University of Minnesota. We followed Noam Chomsky's principles in his classic work, Syntactic Structures, which is the catechism of syntax. His colleague, Stephen Peeker, as we said, wrote about words and rules being the ingredients of a language. Another colleague from New Zealand wrote about the recursive mind and emphasized that the mind builds meaning by embedding smaller units inside of larger units, much the way these Russian or Ukrainian dolls do in the figure shown. One of the leading figures in computer programming and algorithms in general focused his last or most recent book in his series on combinatorial algorithms. And our software uses a combinatorial approach using syntactic categories. We don't use numerical properties of words, we use categorical properties. So when we go back to the traditional text layout, as shown in this first paragraph of Treasure Island, note that when we think about the high resolution data that come in through the fovea, it's only these three words in the middle, only because they're that are linguistically relevant. The other intrafoveal words are not linguistically relevant. They don't help a reader understand or add context that's usable to the building up of a sentence structure in the reader's mind. They're just a distraction. And the brain has to apply attentional resources to ignore those words. This is the layout generated by our software. As I said before, we use recursive, categorical, combinatorial algorithms and combine those with visual parameters to fit the text into one or two fixation eye spans. By keeping the length of the phrases relatively short, we help provide multi-row context to help the reader across any given row of text inspection. So in this layout, we now have 11 linguistically relevant intrafoveal words, and that only because there is still treasure not yet lifted. This is in contrast to the conventional formatting, where the interfoveal words that are linguistically relevant to each other amount to only 3 words. Moreover, because the attentional resources are no longer strained, because they used to have to ignore the words outside of that oval, um, the parafoveal preview and post-view effects are enhanced. So it begins to affect a post-view parafoveal effect as one moves off of this phrase here of the island, and one begins to also get a parafoveal preview effect of I take up my pen as one is going down through that 11-word segment. The software was first tested in Dr. Fletcher's cognitive science laboratory in a specially designed study that was intra-subject and used a checkerboard randomization protocol. The other conditions of the study are shown up there. What he found was that the format was especially helpful to the lower third of the college readers. The regular format, this lower third got less than 10% correct on the retention study. The top third, by contrast, had over 40% correct. And these were challenging passages from the Federal Register at a grade 15 level. The middle third was basically somewhere in between. They're stratified, of course, by their retention score in the block format. The lower third more than doubled their retention score up to about 27% correct. The middle third also got a nice boost in their retention. The top third demonstrated no effect of the formatting. Dr. Fletcher also did additional research in another group of students with a different kind of text content. And he showed that there were improved retention results across the various forms of representation, the surface form, the propositional model, and a situation model. It's intriguing that the situation model actually showed the greatest relative increase. We'll talk about that later. The experiment lasted an hour, and so about half an hour in each format. And they were asked if they were experiencing eye strain or not. And these college students said, about 40% of them, that they did experience eye strain reading the block text format. By contrast, only about 10% of them reported experiencing eye strain with the Visual Syntactic Text Format. As that research had been done in young adults, we were able to establish that it would be safe to conduct research in younger students because it did not appear to cause any harm. And based on that, we were able to conduct longer studies in classroom settings. We received 3 different Department of Education grants, a phase 1 and phase 2 work in the grades 6 through 11. These were year-long studies in the classroom in which Students read either block format or the Visual Syntactic Text Format. They read for about 50 minutes a week, usually 20 minutes every other day. And they would take quizzes after each reading session, and then they would take unit exams every 2 or 3 weeks, and then a final exam. And they also had pre-test and post-test assessments of their reading proficiency with standardized academic achievement tests that were displayed in regular formatting. Later, we also obtained an Institute of Educational Science, or IES, grant from the Department of Education for a Phase 3 efficacy study. This was similar in that it was year-long and classroom-based. It was focusing on grades 7 and 8, and these used very well-controlled, randomized controlled trial study design. This was independently conducted by the University of California, Irvine, and the technology developing team had no involvement in the research at all, other than providing the technology. Dr. Vogel's quiz research showing the results on quizzes given immediately after a reading session are shown here. The persons who had English as their native language got a nice boost relative to the control group pretty much right away, and it continued, and it seemed to actually widen over the course of the year. And the group who were studying in English as a second language, almost all native Spanish, it took a few extra sessions for the curves to come apart, with the stronger gains with the VSTF method getting wider over the course of the year as well. These are the results of unit exams given every 2 or 3 weeks over the course of the academic year. This is important because the material being tested was the standard textbook provided as for how well the students learned the subject, which was history. So even after having read the passage 2 or 3 weeks earlier, what the students had learned and remembered persisted. And the final exam, given at the end of the academic year, was striking in that there was almost a full standard deviation difference between the control group and the VSTF group. Using the pre-test, post-test assessment of students' reading proficiency with a test that used regular format for the testing, Dr. Vogel's research showed a transference effect. That means that even when the students no longer were using the VSTF format, they had become stronger readers. As you can see in the control groups in the blue line, each of the control groups made about their year's worth of progress between the pre-test and the post-test, between the fall and the spring. By contrast, in the red lines, the students in the VSTF, or called here the Live Inc group, made an additional 1 or 2 years additional growth in their reading proficiency. And when looking at the subgroups of English as a native language and English as a second or other language, there was an encouraging trend in that the non-native English students were beginning to close the gap in their reading comprehension and proficiency compared to the native English students in the control groups. The studies also used the ACT test in the 11th grade pre-test, post-test measures. The state of Colorado requires all juniors to take an ACT test, whether they were planning to go to college or not. And the ACT organization has stated that to get a score of 21 or greater is highly predictive of the student having a reading proficiency that would enable them to get a C grade or higher at entry-level social science courses in college. And what the study showed is that the students who had been randomized to the VSTF condition had a very impressive shift in the proportion of students who were able to get their ACT score over that 21 number. They basically added an additional 15% above that line. And given that this is the group who would try to get into college and hope they can succeed, this additional 50% has the potential to significantly lower the number of students who drop out of college because of reading challenges. It was also impressive that the students actually stated they preferred the VST format over block text, especially if they had to read block text from a computer. When asked, would you rather be reading your reading material in a book or from a laptop? The students said they would have preferred to read it from a book. On the other hand, the students who had been assigned to the VSTF condition said they would prefer to read from a laptop as long as it included the VSTF formatting. It's a side study. Dr. Vogel also worked with some colleagues with some fourth graders who had an IEP. Most of these had dyslexia. And they did an interesting study design. Even though they did not have a lot of students, they took a lot of measurements over the course of the year. And this was able to give them statistical power. The groups read together in a classroom where they were projecting the text on a projector. So there is this additional effect of reading out loud and perhaps reading as a group, hearing how other students were also imparting various prosodic patterns to the elocution. But the Dibbles test was given in standard format to each of the students individually. And it did show that those who had been in the VSTF, or in this case, the Living group, made significant gains in their fluency using the Dibbles test. Because of these results across all these grades, our first publishing partner, Harcourt, applied the technology in their publications across all of these grade level groups in all of these subject areas: language arts, natural science, and history and social sciences. We know from their statistics that a large portion of their students who whose school districts had adopted those textbooks had access to the Living tool. And this indicates that there were over 30 million student textbook years of enhanced reading using the Living format over the duration of those textbooks' use. This is an example of the Living pop-up that would appear in the online textbook. I'll give you a few minutes to read that. As I said before, we also partnered with McGraw-Hill in the development of college-level textbooks, particularly for developmental reading courses and entry-level social sciences. This is an example of the pop-up with the VSTF display in the McGraw-Hill product. As we were working with the college level textbooks, we began to appreciate how academic reading in various content areas had specialized terms and also more complex syntactic structure. And therefore, we began to focus on strengthening and making our algorithms more sophisticated. We also wanted to provide a tool that would enable any reader to dynamically convert any text in real time. Of course, in the healthcare environment, the electronic medical record has become an integral part of healthcare, and very few hospitals would rely on a paper record now. This is the tool as it would be used in a hospital, and the tool is being used in several of the top hospitals in the country based on the U.S. News ranking. This is how the text gets converted in real time. This is the paragraph here that gets dynamically reformatted. Looking at that one sentence, this illustrates the principles that we are using in the VSTF method. As you can see, we do have embedded clauses within the larger sentence. It again illustrates that we have the lines break at phrase and clause boundaries. We have shorter rows of text that fit into one or two fixation spans. The cascading depicts syntactic hierarchies. The row clusters, in other words, not just one row at a time, but two or more rows, remain vivid in the mind's eye of the reader. And the indentations also help guide the eyes from row to row, so that as a reader is completing the processing of one row, they already have a cue based on the indentation patterns where their eyes are going to need to go next. And this is a diagram of what is happening at the syntactic level, generating the indentation patterns accordingly. And this was used in the patents that were obtained. Research was done with medical doctors in a controlled environment, not during direct patient care, but in a simulation center. And we were able to make a recording of the reader reading off of the screen and what was shown on the screen at any given moment, and the results on quizzes that were taken after reading various medical passages. What this research showed in medical reading was very similar to what was seen in the college students. So both for college-educated readers and medical school-educated readers, we saw this fairly widespread in reading performance between the top third and the lower third. And it was the lower third who got a nice boost in their retention and in their speed. The middle third also had a benefit, mainly in somewhat faster reading, but also a slight increase in retention. So there was never a case where people read fast but had their retention go down. In the top third, again, much like the college studies, had very high speed and retention and didn't get any additional benefit from the formatting. Eye movement studies were also done. These are with higher resolution equipment than what you might see with heat camera studies. And the eye movements show that the eyes are beginning to adopt a qualitatively different strategy for inspecting the text. On the left are the rapid stochades, fixations, and regressions that occur in regular format. On the right, with the VSTF format, the readers did have more efficient and higher retention in their reading scores, but they had fewer fixations. And the fixations that they did have lasted longer than the fixations with block formatting. And the fixation area was larger as well, and there were fewer saccades. It's as though the eyes strategically encircled groups of words rather than just going from one word to the next. So at this point in the development, we had this advanced set of algorithms that we could show were effective in medical reading and other technical reading, more on a college level. And based on the level of our development, the University of California, Irvine was able to get a level 3 efficacy grant from the U.S. Department of Education. They studied 7th and 8th graders. This graph shows the results in the 8th graders. They had pre-test and post-test studies. The pre-test was done in the spring of the prior academic year. They used what's called the SBAC, or the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium test, that the state of California uses every year across all of their students. And the writing section of the SBAC was used for this comparison, especially because the writing actually involves technical reading. The students are given 2 different passages to read and compare and contrast, and then write an essay about what they had read. The middle 50% of the study group is where the biggest lift occurred. Again, that's similar to our other studies at the college and medical school level, in that the top third of the study population did not get a benefit from VSTF. But this middle 50% had twice the growth in academic reading proficiency using this test compared to the control group, and the national median. And based on this study, which is quite large, about 4,000 students total, which was randomized and controlled and conducted independent of the developers of the technology, the U.S. Department of Education concluded that this was scientifically proven to accelerate literacy growth. And this is why it was recognized as qualifying for the What Works Clearinghouse. And the level of efficacy that was found put it at the top 2.7% of literacy studies that were submitted to the Department of Education over the past 20 years. The research has also been reproduced in other centers, including internationally. This research was done in Korean eighth graders. They read over 15 weeks, but they had 4 reading sessions a week for a total of 60 reading sessions. These are Korean native speakers who are learning English in the 8th grade and using the effect size relative to the baseline. The control groups had what would be considered an expected amount of growth in their reading proficiency from participating in this study over that period of time. And the students who were reading VSTF texts had more than twice the growth in their pre-test to post-test reading proficiency growth. The investigator also did testing for the students' oral phrasing fluency. And the oral elocution of English is an important part of learning another language, of course, and it was emphasized in these courses that the students were taking. Increases, in other words, both their reading proficiency and their spoken English fluency. Similar studies have been done in a number of other countries, in addition to Korea, including Japan, China, the Philippines, Iraq, and Iran, Spain, France, and special studies done in English language learners in the United States. An investigator in Korean college students who were learning English, with English being a required subject among Korean colleges, did baseline testing of students in the course based on their working memory. They tested working memory and stratified them with tests that did not involve language, but nonetheless measured their working memory. In information-based comprehension and retention tests, the VSTF condition resulted in higher scores both among those with low working memory and those with high working memory. And what's notable here over the other kind of comprehension testing that was done, which was inference-making comprehension, the students in the low working memory group had a significant increase in their score over their score with block formatting. The investigators hypothesized that by freeing up the cognitive resources that would have been used for parsing, the VSTF enabled students to use their working memory instead to improve inference-making comprehension. Again, so this is an illustration of the two issues we are dealing with when we produced Visual Syntactic Text Formatting. But it's important to be clear that this is not being proposed as an alternative or a replacement for the very fundamental work that's being done in the earlier grades, where people refer to the science of reading. And the science of reading is focusing on left brain language centers, especially for phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency, as well as vocabulary. And the science of reading is mainly targeting the earlier grades as well as dyslexia remediation. By contrast, visual syntactic formatting really builds on this foundation. It is more effective if students have good word decoding skills. But it is possible that giving a richer phrase context around words and avoiding distracting words above and below the targeted word might help some readers in decoding words that they are not familiar with. Otherwise, we were talking about intrafoveal text data and eye movements, as well as the need to build recursive syntactic structures during the reading process. This is relatively recent data, at least for the grade 12, which just came out in September. The grade 4 and 8 data were released last year for the 2024 studies. People are talking about how our national assessment of educational progress scores keep dropping. And of course, it's very important to think about these early foundational years. And we see that between the fourth grade and eighth grade scores dropped, especially compared to the other percentiles. The 10th percentile showed the largest drop from between 1992 and 2024. But in addition to the drops in these lower percentile groups at grades 4 and 8, there's another factor going on at the grade 12 level, and I'm going to focus on that. The solid line is the 1992 score, and the dashed line is the 2024 score. And you'll note that at the 10th percentile, there's a significant drop between 1992 and 2024. And this is a trend that has been going on over the past 30 years. But this other drop at the 50th percentile is a new drop. It had not been observed in the last prior NAEP score, which was in 2019. So now we're beginning to see a drop even in the average students at the 50th percentile. Now, some people would say that this drop is because of COVID, which is certainly possible. Others say too much screen time. But another factor is the fact that the grown-ups, the parents, are not reading at home for recreation anymore either. So the students are not really seeing as many role model examples in the home of what fluent reading would look like. And among adults in the past 20 years, the proportion who report reading for pleasure on any given day or week has dropped by almost half in the past 20 years. And it is now only about 20% of the adult population who report reading regularly for non-work purposes. You'll also note that the top 10 percentile and 25 percentile has not had any drop in their NAEP scores over the past 30 years. Well, what is another way to think about these drops? Even within one's own percentile ranking, the drop between 92 and 2024 would mean that an average student in 2024 at the 50th percentile reads no better than a person in the middle of the 10th grade in 1992. And even among those at the bottom 10 percentile uh, in 1992, they were reading at a higher level than they are in 2024. It's as though these students have lost 3 grade levels of reading proficiency. We're especially thinking about those students at the 50th percentile who are dealing with a world that has changed a lot in the past 30 years. They're competing for jobs in a global job market. They're beginning to wonder about AI. They're beginning to wonder if it's worth the trouble of even going to college. We feel the Readmax reading tool can give these students the boost they need to succeed in their college level courses. We know that our tool can make this particular group of students better readers and writers and even speakers of English. And because we free up working memory resources, we strengthen their ability to learn and analyze complex texts in more abstract ways. And with these skills, they will be empowered to go out in the world and serve society in these various roles that society does need. Now, some students might say, I just don't think I need this kind of support. That's not my cup of tea. And of course, we know that at least a third of various groups will not feel they need the formatting. But one could remind them that Winston Churchill used a similar formatting method in preparing his script for the famous finest hour speech that he made to Parliament, trying to motivate them to get ready for World War II. You can see more detail about that at this link here. If Winston Churchill were alive today, and if he had the plain version of his speech written out in block format, he could use our app or our web-based tool and instantly convert it into this more eloquent phrasing format. And I would encourage students to use the privacy that they would have by reading from their personal device to read the more complex passages out loud. Um, now, I explained how we thought carefully about how text is formatted and how the parafoveal data could be re-engineered to be more synergistic to interpretation. But actually, St. Jerome had already thought of this around 400 AD when he was making translations of the Bible that were originally in Greek and Hebrew, and he translated them into Latin. And he gave instructions, at least in some parts of the Bible, to what the future people who would be making copies of this, because obviously they had to be manually recopied by scribes. He said, use this new method that I am doing here called percola ecamata. And percola ecamata means by clauses and by phrases. He said that which is written percola ecamata conveys more obvious sense to the readers. And it was obvious to the readers. But what was not obvious was exactly how to do it, especially as the centuries went by. Uh, they didn't realize that St. Jerome thought the syntactic structure was obvious, but it wasn't that obvious to everyone else. But we have algorithms now, and so we can convert any English text that's available digitally into the VSTF format. So in summary, we've shown how this formatting was empirically developed, actually initially as a solution to a problem with persons with a foveal defect from a genetic retina disease. But then it was expanded and validated for a wide variety of adolescent and adult readers. We've shown that it improves immediate comprehension and longer-term retention of what is read with the formatting. And we've also shown that there's a transference effect in that over the course of the year, by using this regularly with one's assigned academic reading material, the students will improve their proficiency scores for reading, writing, and oral fluency on standardized tests that use regular formatting. The students actually, if they have the permission and feel comfortable doing it, reading out loud does help the students use their own auditory processing mechanisms to strengthen their understanding of the syntax. And we've seen improvements in a variety of native languages, including Spanish, Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. I'll leave this barcode, these QR codes up for a while. This will take you directly to the YouTube instructions on our website, the App Store, where the app can be downloaded, the Google Play Store, or you can go to the website, readmax.com, where you can download an extension that gets installed on your Chrome browser. Thank you very much for your attention. The tool is called Readmax, and it's available now.